So once we are done with arrays, it's time to move on and talk about one of the most important topics in JavaScript called objects. So what is an object? Objects group together a set of variables and functions to create a model of something you would recognize from the real world. In JavaScript, objects are represented as collections of name-value pairs. It is a simple and efficient way to collect variables and functions together. Objects can have properties and methods. So what does this mean? What are the properties and methods of objects? Properties can be primitive data types like strings, numbers, booleans, or even arrays, an object itself. As for the methods, they are functions which are passed in the objects in order to perform a specific task. In order to make it clearer, in the real life the object can be compared to a person which has a first name, last name, age, profession, height, and so on. All of these components can be considered as the properties of the object. In the same way, we can compare the behavior of the person, like speak, run, work, sing, read, to methods of the objects. Alright, let's go ahead and create our very first object. I'm going to declare the variable called person and assign to it empty curly braces. Let's run it to the console. So as you see, we got the empty curly braces. It means that we have just created an empty object. So each object in JavaScript should be expressed by the curly braces. As we said, objects can contain properties and methods. In order to add properties to the object, we have to put here the property names like first name, then a colon, and the value John. So now you can see here the first name, John. If we want to add more properties, we do it in the same way, but you need to note that we have to separate them by commas. So let's add other properties. Let's say last name, Smith, and age 27. Okay, so now our person object has three different properties. Actually, we're able to add the properties to the object in different ways. We can use dot notation or brackets notation. Let's see both of them. At first, I'm going to use dot notation. Let's add to the person property called married and make it true. Actually, dot is considered as an operator. It is called a member access operator. So as you can see, we have added a new property to the object. Let's go ahead and add another property to our person object, but in this case I'm going to use another method where we use square brackets. It is called, again, brackets notation. So we have to write person followed by the square brackets, and then let's insert here the property, let's say city, and assign to it New York. So we added another property to our object, but in this case using a different type of operator. Alright, so in both cases we got the same results, but in the real world dot notation is more popular and commonly used. Okay, next I'm going to show you how we can access the values of the properties. For that, again, we need to use the dot notation. Suppose that we want to display the first name of the person in the console. For that, we need person dot first name. So we got John. Alright, now I'm going to show you how we can access and manipulate the values of the properties. Suppose that we want to change the value of the first name. For that, we have to write person dot first name, and we just need to assign to it new value, let's say Bob. So as you can see, now the value of the first name is changed. So that's the way how you can access and manipulate the values of the properties. Okay, so as we said at the beginning, we are able to use objects as the properties. In order to demonstrate it, I'm going to add to our person object new property, which itself will be object. I'm going to call it daughter, then assign to it curly braces and insert here a couple of properties, name n, and the age 5. Alright, so as you can see, we have a new object in the person object, and it's added as the plain property. To access the values of the properties of that newly added object, we can use again dot notation. So let's go ahead and get the name of the daughter and display it in the console. For that, we need person. Then we have to access that newly added object daughter. And after that, we have to access the name property. So we have here n. Alright, so besides the properties, we can add the methods to the objects as well. Actually, methods are the plain JavaScript functions. In order to pass the function inside an object, there are a couple of ways. In ES5, we could use the keyword function, like so. First of all, we need to specify the name of the method. Let's say my function. Then it should be followed the keyword function without the name. Actually, this kind of function is called an anonymous function, and we used anonymous functions here because we can invoke them using the method names. Let's see it. Let's run to the console. Hi there. And then in order to call this method, we have to write person.myFunction. So we have here hi there. Okay, so again, it's the ES5 approach. Let's consider the way of creating methods in the ES6 version. Instead of using the keyword function, we can define a method with the help of the arrow function. As you see, we have the same result here, but now using the arrow function instead of the regular one. Besides that, we can define methods inside of the objects like so. We don't need the arrow function at all. We can simply place the parentheses right after the name of the method, and it should work fine. So as you see, we have the same result in the console. Alright, that's all about the methods. Now I'm going to make our example a bit more complex and use the properties in the function. But before that, let's pass some parameters here. I'm going to put here daughter name. Then as the second parameter, let's use father name. And then finally, daughter age. Then inside the block of code, I'm going to run to the console. Daughter name plus is a daughter of. Then plus father name, followed by the text and she is. Next we need daughter age, and finally years old. Alright, now we have to pass the arguments here and use the properties of a person object. As the daughter name, we should insert here person dot daughter dot name. Next we have father name. So in order to get the name of the father, we have to insert person dot first name. And as the age of the daughter, let's go ahead and insert person dot daughter dot age. So if we save, then we will get in the console N is a daughter of Bob, and she is 5 years old. Alright, so in general we can pass a new object as the argument of the function on the fly. I mean when we call the function. For that we need only one parameter, because we're going to use the object as an argument. So let's get rid of those parameters from here and place here just one parameter. I'm going to call it PAR, I mean parameter. Then create an object on the fly. First property is going to be daughter name. Let's make it Jesse. Then next one is going to be father name, Michael. And finally we need daughter age, 5. As we already know, to get the values of the properties from the object, we need to use dot operator. So we need to add to all the properties the parameter par. So again, we have passed a single parameter inside our method, and then we passed on the fly an object as an argument of the function and used its property values. So we got here Jessie is a daughter of Michael and she is 5 years old. Okay, so that's it about the objects. Let's go ahead and discuss another important topic in JavaScript and also in all programming languages. It's time to talk about loops. If you want to run the same code over and over again, each time with a different value, then you have to use loops. In general, looping means to repeat the block of code over and over again when the condition is true. Actually, in modern JavaScript, loops are rarely used. Mostly we use array helper methods like for each and map. We will discuss those methods as well, but now let's take care of the loops. Alright, so to demonstrate how powerful tool the loop is, let's go ahead and create an array. I'm going to pass here a couple of names. Let's say John, Nick, Bob, Michael, and let's say Mary. Now suppose that we want to output each item from the array at the same time. So what can we do? The first thing that comes to mind is that we can access each item in the array and then log them to the console separately, like so. Let's run the first item. We need the name of the array followed by the index number 0. Then duplicate this line of code 4 times and just change the index numbers from 1 through 4. So we have here the names from the array, the result that we wanted to get. Actually, that's not the best way at all, because we had to type a lot. We used a specified index number for each item. Here we had just only 5 items and it was a bit easier, but imagine that sometimes we might have hundreds of them, then it will be crazy, right? So we need something else, and it is a loop. To avoid the use of such an inconvenient way, we can simply use the for loop. At first, let's demonstrate how to write it syntactically. We need to use keyword for, followed by the parentheses, in which we have to write some expressions and conditions. First of all, we need to create the variable which will be the initializer, or sometimes it is called counter. Mostly the name of the variable is I, which stands for the initializer. In this case, we have to use let keyword. So if we want to output the names from the array starting with John, then we need to assign to the variable I the value 0. Because as you know, John is the first item of an array and its index number is 0. After the end of the first statement, we need to place a semicolon, which is followed by the condition. The array consists of 5 items. The last item, Mary, has the index number 4. So we need to write here the following condition: I is less than 5. And the last statement that we need to put here is I++. It is actually an arithmetical operator called increment operator, and it's the same as I equal to I plus 1. So when we use an increment operator, after each step the value increases by the 1. The last thing that we have to do is to insert here the block of code. Let's run to the console, array with the index number I. So as you can see, we have here the exact same result, the names from the array. So each step in the loop, I mean the whole cycle, is called an iteration. At first the JavaScript engine sees that the variable I equals 0. Then it checks the condition. 0 is less than 5, the condition is true, and it prints out the first item from the array, John. Before the first iteration ends, I is updated to 1 using the increment operator. After that starts the second iteration. I is already updated to 1, 1 is less than 5, the condition is again true, and JavaScript engine prints out the item of the array which has the index number 1, and it's Nick. So the iterations continue until I becomes 5. In that case, the condition is false and the loop stops execution. Okay, now imagine that we don't know how many items the array has, and also we want to output all of them. In this case, we have to use the property of the array, which is the length. So here, instead of 5, we can use just length. As you see, we have the same output. Alright, let's make our example a bit more complex, and also I would like to show you some other features of loops. Let's get rid of this line of code. We don't need it anymore. Now, suppose that I want to find Bob in an array using a loop and then output it to the console. I'm going to use if statement inside the loop and insert the following condition. So, if array with index number I equals to Bob. So this condition will be true when the loop reaches the third iteration. As soon as that happens, I'm going to display it in the console. So let's run to the console, array with index number I plus some text, let's say is my brother. So as you can see, we have Bob is my brother. In order to output other items as well, we need to insert console.log array with index number I, but we have to place it outside of the if statement. So here we have all existing items. Now suppose that we want to stop the loop when the condition is true. For that we can use the break statement. So when the JavaScript engine sees the break statement, it stops looping. It doesn't matter whether the condition is true or false. So you see the first two items of the array, then the output Bob is my brother, and after that the for loop is stopped. Alright. Now suppose that we want to output all the items in the array except Bob. For that we can use another statement which is called continue. So let's insert here continue. As you see, now we have all the items except Bob. So the continue statement breaks one iteration in the loop if a specified condition occurs and continues with the next iteration. So in this case, when the condition inside of the if statement is true, then it executes this line of code. Then JavaScript engine is going to output Bob, but it says the continue statement. Therefore, it breaks the current iteration and moves directly to the next iteration and prints out Michael and Mary. Alright, that's all about for loop. Next I'm going to describe another type of loop which is called while loop. While loop does actually almost the same work. The main difference between while and for loops is in syntax. As you remember, in case of for loop we had three statements in parentheses: initialization, condition, and increment. As for the while loop, the counter is created outside of it. Then we need to write the keyword while, and inside the parentheses we have only the condition. Let's say I is less than or equal to 10. After that we have a block of code inside the curly braces. In the block of code we can put the increment or decrement of the counter. At first let's log to the console I and then place the increment. So we have numbers from 0 through 10 because in the while loop we had condition I is less than or equal to 10. Okay, as you see, I++ is written after the console, but if we place it before the console, then we'll get the numbers from 1 to 11. It seems a little bit strange, so let me explain what has happened here. As you know, in case of the for loop, the value of counter was updated after the execution of the block of code. In this case, we see that I is set to 0. It means that we have 0 is less than or equal to 10 in the condition. JavaScript engine continues to read the code line by line. It sees I++ and updates its value from 0 to 1. And that is the reason why we got 1 as the first number instead of 0. And also that's why the result ends with 11. When I becomes 10, then the condition is true, but because of that we have I++ before the console.log, then the value of I becomes 11 for the last iteration. Alright, the next that I want to show you is do-while loop. The do-while loop acts similarly to the while loop. It executes the block of code once before checking if the condition is true or false. If it is true, then do-while loop continues looping as long as the condition is true. At first we write the keyword do, then inside of the curly braces we need to write the block of code. Let's run to the console I, then insert here I++, and then we need to write keyword while with its condition. Let's say I is less than 10. So as you can see, we have numbers from 0 through 9. As we said, in case of for and while loops, the execution of a block of code would not start if the conditions are false, but in case of the do-while loop, it doesn't matter whether the condition is true or false. The first iteration will be always executed. So if we make here condition false and write I is greater than 10, then we'll get only the 0. So remember that in case of the do-while loop, at first the code is executed and then the condition is checked. This is the main difference between the while and do-while loops. Alright, that was all about the loops. Let's move on to the next topic.